Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle a question that's, well, kind of crucial for the future. How do we make sure that as AI gets smarter, it doesn't go off the rails? Make sure it's working with us, not against us. This deep dive is like your crash course on one of the big challenges in keeping AI aligned and under control.
That's right. And the core problem is, well, imagine AI systems that are more skilled than the best human experts.
Mhm.
How can we, or even less clever AIs acting as judges, how can we be sure we're actually supervising them effectively? It's almost like trying to referee a professional sports game when you barely know the rules.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So for this deep dive, you've brought in some research that really caught my eyes, looking at whether we can use weaker large language models, so AIs that have less knowledge and reasoning power, to actually evaluate the output of stronger LLMs. It's focusing on two methods in particular, debate and what they call consultancy.
And the mission here, the big question, is whether these methods, using less capable AI in this sort of judge role, can be a shortcut to reliable oversight. Can they give us a trustworthy way to monitor advanced AI, even if the judges aren't as smart as the AI they're watching? It's a fascinating possibility.
And to test these ideas, the researchers used a bunch of different tasks to see how well they held up. We're talking extractive question answering, where the AI needs to find the answer in a given text, closed question answering, which is basically a general knowledge test, and even multimodal reasoning, which involves both text and images, like showing the AI a photo of a dog and then asking it questions about a text describing the dog. So they really put these methods through their paces.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. When they talk about debate and consultancy, what do they actually mean in this context?
All right, let's start with consultancy. Picture a single AI, let's call it the consultant, and it's trying to convince a weaker AI judge that a particular answer is correct. Now, here's a crucial part. In the experiments, the consultant was actually assigned an answer to argue for. So it had a 50-50 chance of being told to support the correct answer or the wrong one, and the judge could ask questions to kind of probe the consultant's reasoning.
Okay, I see. So one AI trying to convince another, even if the first one might be arguing for something that's not true. And how is debate different from that?
So in debate, you have two AI agents, the debaters, and they take opposing sides on a question. They each present their arguments to the same, less advanced AI judge, trying to convince the judge that their answer is the right one. It's a head-to-head competition, two different points of view going at it in front of the judge.
Got it. So consultancy is more like a one-on-one persuasion attempt, while debate is this clash of arguments. And they also had a baseline to compare these two, right?
Yes, exactly. They use direct question answering as the benchmark. This is where the weaker AI judge just tries to answer the question itself, either with or without being able to see a source article, depending on the task. This helps us figure out if debate or consultancy actually gives us any benefit compared to just letting the judge try to solve it on their own.
All right, so the stage is set. What did they find when the consultant and debaters were given assigned roles? Meaning they didn't get to choose what they were arguing for.
Well, across all the different types of tasks we just talked about, extractive, closed, and multimodal, they found that debate consistently led to better accuracy in the judge's decisions compared to consultancy. That's a pretty big deal right there. Even with less sophisticated AI, having two sides argue it out seems to be a more reliable way to catch potential errors in more advanced systems. This result is especially interesting because it builds on previous work that mostly focused on just one type of task.
That's fascinating. So even when the debaters might be stuck arguing for something that's wrong, the format of the debate seems to guide the weaker judge better than a single consultant. And how did debate compare to the judge simply trying to answer the question themselves?
Now, this is where things get a bit more nuanced. For the extractive question answering tasks, where there was information asymmetry, meaning the judge couldn't see the article, with the answer debate did outperform the judge just trying to answer without the article, which, aligns with what some earlier studies have found. However, debate didn't do any better than the judge when the judge did have access to the article.
Okay, so if the judge has the information, they can figure it out on their own, just as well as when they're listening to a debate where the debaters also have that information. Makes sense. What about the other types of tasks, the closed QA and multimodal reasoning, where everyone has the same basic information?
Yeah, for those tasks, the advantage of debate over direct question answering was either really small or it wasn't there at all, or even, get this, sometimes it was negative, especially when the judge model was about as strong as the debaters.
Yeah.
So it seems like debate isn't universally better. The relative capabilities of the judge and the debaters really matter.
That's a really important point. Debate isn't a magic bullet. The specific context matters. Now, they also messed around with some of the details of the setup, right? Like the number of turns, how the arguments were chosen, stuff like that.
Right. They tried changing things like the number of back-and-forth exchanges in both debate and consultancy. They also use what they called a best of N approach, where they generate a bunch of different arguments and have a model pick the most persuasive one. They even tried giving the judge some examples beforehand and asking the judge to, like, explain their reasoning step by step.
And did any of those tweaks make a big difference in the results?
Actually, most of these adjustments didn't have much impact on the overall findings. It seems like the fundamental structures of debate and consultancy are what's really driving the results, more than these little details of the interaction.
Huh, interesting. So the core concepts are what really matter. They also mentioned something in the paper about judges having a bias towards one position or another, regardless of the argument itself. What was that about?
Yeah. They noticed that the judge models sometimes showed a preference for either the first or the second answer presented, no matter if it was actually right or wrong. It's called positional bias. They tried a simple fix, just flipping the order of the answers in debates, but that didn't totally get rid of the bias. So they concluded that just randomly shuffling the order of things might be enough to address this.
Okay, makes sense. A little bit of randomness can help level the playing field. Now let's get to the really interesting part you mentioned earlier when the consultant and the main debater could actually choose which answer to argue for based on what they thought was right. How did things change then?
Yeah, this is where the findings get super insightful, especially for understanding the potential benefits and risks of these methods. So, with what they called open consultancy, the AI consultant got to decide whether to argue for what it believed was the correct answer. And they found that while the consultant did often choose the correct answer, the judge was still super easily swayed by whatever the consultant argued, whether it was right or wrong.
Ooh, that does sound a bit concerning. If the judge is just going along with whatever the consultant says, even when the consultant is wrong, that could make errors in advanced AI even worse, right?
Exactly. Now compare that to open debate. Here, one debater, called the protagonist, gets to choose the answer they want to argue for, and the other debater, the antagonist, argues against it. And what they found was that the judge was less likely to blindly follow the protagonist's choice in open debate compared to open consultancy. That competitive back and forth seems to force the judge to be a bit more critical.
So the debate format makes the judge more discerning.
Exactly. And even more importantly, when the protagonist in open debate picked the incorrect answer, the judge was much better at recognizing that mistake compared to open consultancy when the consultant picked incorrectly. That's a potentially huge advantage of debate for error detection. It's like a better safety net.
That's a big point in favor of debate. Seems way more resilient to being tricked. But was there any kind of trade-off?
Yeah, there's a balance here. So while open debate was better at catching those wrong choices, it did sometimes lead to slightly lower accuracy compared to open consultancy when the protagonist actually picked the correct answer. So there's a potential trade-off between robustness to errors and maximizing accuracy when the AI already gets it right.
Interesting. So debate might be a bit more cautious, which is good for safety, but maybe not quite as efficient when the AI is already on the right track. And they also looked at what happens when you use stronger debaters, right? How did they even define strength in this case?
They use something called ELO scores. It's kind of like a ranking system, like in chess or in some sports. The higher the score, the better they generally are winning. So they adapted this to measure the persuasiveness of different debater models, basically, how
Yeah.
good they were at convincing the judge.
Okay, so higher ELO means a more persuasive debater. What did they find when they looked at these ELO scores and how accurate the judges were?
They saw a general trend. The more persuasive the debaters were, as measured by their ELO score, the slightly more accurate the judges tended to be in their decisions across different tasks, which is good. It suggests that as AI gets more capable, the oversight could potentially get better too. But they did note that this effect wasn't as strong as in some earlier, more limited studies.
So stronger debaters help, but it's not like a night and day difference on its own. Anything else stand out in that part of the analysis?
Yeah, they found something they called a self-preference bias. It seemed like the judge models sometimes underrated the persuasiveness of debaters that came from different model families than themselves. Like, a judge based on one type of AI architecture might be less easily convinced by a debater based on a different architecture, even if the argument was good.
Wow, that's really interesting. Even AIs can have subtle biases.
Hmm.
So taking all of this into account, What are the main takeaways about this whole idea of using less advanced LLMs to oversee more advanced ones? What does this research tell us about achieving scalable oversight?
Well, the most encouraging finding is that debate consistently did better than consultancy, especially in helping weaker judges spot wrong claims in those open settings where the AI's got to pick what to argue for. That's a really good sign that it could be a powerful tool for catching errors in more powerful AI.
But it's not a perfect solution just yet, right? What are the big questions that still need to be answered?
Oh, absolutely. The researchers themselves point out that this study mainly looked at the inference capabilities of these methods, how well they work in a single instance. It didn't really look at how they'd perform if they were part of an ongoing training process for AI. That's a critical next step.
Yeah.
How would using debate or consultancy actually affect the way advanced AI learns and develops over time?
Right, so we know how it works in a single evaluation, but not necessarily how it would work in a continuous loop as the AI is learning. What other important directions for future research did they highlight?
They mentioned several key areas. One is actually training AI agents to be better debaters and consultants, using the judge's feedback as a way to learn. Another is testing these methods with human judges to see how well these findings with AI judges actually translate to human oversight. They also want to look at different kinds of weak, strong differences besides just knowledge, like maybe giving the more advanced AI special tools or access to different information. And finally, they want to see how robust these methods are to, intentional deception. What if a more advanced AI was trying to trick the judge?
Those all sound like really important avenues for future research. So, where do we stand right now on this idea of debate for scalable oversight? Is it a viable path toward AI safety?
Well, based on this research, debate does show a lot of promise as a technique for scalable oversight, especially for identifying when a more advanced AI might be making a mistake. But it's definitely not a solved problem. We need more research, especially on how these protocols would work in a training setting and with human judges, before we can fully understand their potential and their limitations.
This has been a really insightful deep dive into a super complex and important topic. Thanks for walking us through it. So, the key takeaway is that debate, especially the version where the AIs can choose their arguments, seems to be a more robust way to let weaker AI judges oversee stronger AI, especially when it comes to spotting potential errors. But it's not a silver bullet, and there's still a lot to figure out.
Right, and it leads us with a big question. Based on these findings, what are the most important things we need to consider when we're designing oversight mechanisms for the really powerful AI systems of the future? How do we balance efficiency and accuracy while recognizing that even super intelligent AI could be really good at persuading us, even when it's wrong?
That's a really crucial question to think about, and this deep dive has given us a lot to work with as we try to understand future developments in AI safety research. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon with more explorations into the ever-changing world of AI.